Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, doctors begin urging pregnant women to get vaccinated, regardless of any assumed risks. Meanwhile, Israelis get blasted for their apparently poor first impressions left in the Gulf. And finally, a miracle has been reported in Haifa as a blind man regains his sight. Despite all of the best efforts so far and all of the incredible advancements in the vaccination campaign across the country, Israel is still hitting yet another daily landmark for the rise in COVID infections. The youthful feeling of invincibility now obliterated by the latest changes in coronavirus's trend lines. Over 10,000 new cases have been confirmed overnight Tuesday for a 10.2% positivity rating, the highest in Israel's history. And active cases are now at 81,250, with the death toll rising to 4,060. Dr. Yael Haviv Yadid, head of the Sheba Medical Center's ICU, saying that more and more young patients with no underlying health conditions are presenting in life-threatening condition, however, and that this is, quote, no longer an old people's disease. And perhaps at most risk of all is pregnant women. Doctors nationwide now begging all expecting mothers to get vaccinated as soon as possible, both for the sake of themselves and for their babies. And this as at least 10 pregnant women are now hospitalized in critical condition with coronavirus. In fact, 4 babies have already been delivered under coronavirus-caused conditions, mostly by emergency cesarean procedures before the projected due date, and 1 newborn has tragically died. As for the risks associated with vaccination during pregnancy, currently there is very limited data available for the effects of the vaccine during gestation. But on the other hand, the CDC does acknowledge an increased risk of severe complications resulting from COVID-19 in infected pregnant women, including adverse pregnancy outcomes and illness that results in ICU admissions, mechanical ventilation, and death compared with non-pregnant women of similar age.
To all pregnant women who are hesitant whether to go and get the COVID vaccine, I personally truly recommend the vaccine. I think that getting COVID while you're pregnant is much worse than getting a vaccine, which at least theoretically doesn't seem to be in any way endangering pregnant women. We are giving the flu vaccine, we're giving the pertussis vaccine during pregnancy, and the mRNA vaccine, at least again theoretically, shouldn't be in any way more dangerous, and the COVID infection is definitely dangerous during pregnancy. So go get vaccinated.
Now, pregnancy aside, most of the new infections across all segments of the population are still coming from the Arab and more so from the ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities. Just last month, at least 12,000 students from the Haredi communities alone were infected, with the highest morbidity in the ages between 10 and 16, or high school-aged yeshiva students. Still, about 15% of ultra-Orthodox schooling institutions are currently operating in violation of lockdown measures. Prime Minister Netanyahu then joining in on the latest calls, begging the ultra-Orthodox leaders to take things more seriously.
להציל חיים רבים ולצאת מהקורונה, אנחנו חייבים להעלות את אחוז החיסונים באוכלוסייה כולה, אבל בייחוד בציבור הערבי ובציבור החרדי. בכל מקום שאני הולך אני קורא לאנשים להתחסן, אני עושה זאת גם כאן היום בבית שמש, אני שמחתי לשמוע מראשת העיר שיש כאן התקדמות ויש עלייה גדולה, אבל אני בכל זאת רוצה להפנות את דבריי כאן לציבור החרדי ולבקש מכם לכו להתחסן. לכו להתחסן. החיסונים לא רק יצילו את החיים שלכם, את הבריאות שלכם, הם גם יצילו את החיים של הקרובים והיקרים לכם, את ההורים שלכם, הסבא והסבתא, השכנים, החברים. רק יחד נוכל להביס את הקורונה.
So how bad is it on the ground zero in Israel's ICUs? Joining me with some details from isolation is Michal Pfeffer, CCRN and head nurse in the coronavirus department at the Herzog Medical Center. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, as we said before, despite a very successful vaccination campaign, at least initially, numbers are still rising in infection. What is it like on the ground at Herzog right now?
Well, good evening. Right now we have approximately 120 patients in the ward in Herzog Hospital, and unfortunately the numbers keep climbing.
So, how is the overcrowding affecting other patients or the standard of care, and what's being done to combat the issue?
Well, it's definitely not affecting the patients who are in Herzog Hospital and do not have COVID, due to the fact that the management has been diverting staff, all medical, nursing, all kinds of staff to the ward, making sure that the patients who are in Herzog Hospital are not affected. We have a growing staff of multidisciplinary professions taking care of the COVID patients. But we do find that we are getting larger and larger numbers of patients in the ward.
And how does that compare, maybe to other hospitals that maybe you're in contact with? Are you in a better or a worse situation?
Well, we know that the hospitals up north and in Jerusalem are overcrowded. We have, as I said, 120 patients. And we're receiving patients from all over the country. We receive patients from Beersheba, from Afula up in the north, Tel Aviv, all over the country, not only Jerusalem. We have a growing request from all over to receive these elderly patients and to give them the treatment that they really, really need due to the fact that they have COVID-19. Please go and have your vaccine. If you're in a group with that, the Ministry of Health says you should have a vaccine, go and have it. I've had mine. Everyone should have the vaccine.
All right, you heard it. Michal Pfeffer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, in related news, world nations are looking to Israel for tips on our vaccinations program, and they're now working with Israel to formulate a response program for future pandemics as well. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, for one, taking the lead on Monday in the 6th such meeting, calling for the formation of a conglomerate for research between these so-called first mover countries. That is Austria, Greece, Denmark, Australia, Norway, and the Czech Republic.
Look, this is a matter of national security. We're 6 countries with the largest population is Australia. Most of us have populations of 5 to 12 million. Okay, so we're in that range. Why don't we seriously talk about forming a conglomeration, okay? For research, we have research, all have research and scientific capabilities. I've already given instruction to start planning a plant that is basically a government arm. It's not a private company. The Air Force is not a private company. The Air Force is not profitable. This is just as important as an Air Force.
And Netanyahu goes on to call this the century of the virus, arguing that more pandemics are inevitable and therefore beg an international pooled effort, rather than leaving, of course, the world to the mercy of market forces.
We are beginning to be known as the vaccination nation. But why should we be known alone? We don't have any pride of authorship.
Of course, that said, the current crisis is still ongoing. And the Prime Minister goes on to share his insights from the Israeli success story, especially regarding the role of leadership in vaccinating a nation. Having himself been first in line to get the first dose, Netanyahu says that, quote, if you haven't vaccinated yourself, do so, and do so publicly, as it's important for the people to see that officials and doctors alike are confident in getting the vaccine. And now for more, please visit our new and improved website at ILTV.tv and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for daily updates. Now, as Israel works with the international community on a vaccination strategy for the future, the Arab League is convening to work on the future strategy of Middle East negotiations with the West. Charon Regev with the story.
Speaking opposite the UN Security Council on Monday, Secretary General of the Arab League, Ahmed Abul-Gait, took a moment to reflect on the last 4 years in the Middle East and to call on the incoming Biden administration to reverse what he calls the marginalization of the two-state solution.
أننا نتطلع لقيام الإدارة الأمريكية الجديدة بتصحيح الإجراءات والسياسات غير المفيدة والعمل بدعم من الأطراف الإقليمية والدولية المؤثرة على إعادة العملية السياسية إلى مسار مثمر بما يمنح الأمل مجددا للشعب الفلسطيني في أن المجتمع الدولي سوف ينصف مسعاه النبيل للحرية والاستقلال.
As for the UN, officials in the Zoom meeting largely agreed, especially as this conference follows Israel's most recent push to approve nearly 800 new homes and settlements across Judea and Samaria. A move that UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has likewise called to be halted and reversed.
The two-state solution that realizes the legitimate national aspirations of Palestinians and Israelis in line with UN resolutions is the only way to lead to sustainable peace between the two peoples.
Israel, on the other hand, argues that the extension of sovereignty to Israeli settlements in Area C is completely legal under international law and not an impediment to peace per se, as many UN member states like to claim. Either way, the Biden administration's positions and future actions remain to be seen, with several insiders claiming that Biden supports the two-state solution, yet is unlikely to reverse Trump-era changes.
Meanwhile, at these same meetings between the Arab League and the international community, conference attendees took turns addressing the threat to the region posed by Iran, and this while expertly avoiding explicitly naming the Ayatollah regime. The Arab League Secretary General claiming that solutions to such issues include reducing the influence of, quote, regional actors in Syria. Of course, the real news here is that if Iran wants to rebuke these countries in the General Assembly, they'll have to first pay their dues, because Iran and 6 other nations have now had their voting rights suspended for failing to pay dues for 2 years straight. The other nations, including Niger, Libya, the Central African Republic, Congo, Brazzaville, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. Iran, for its part, however, is trying to fight back, arguing that their failure to pay stems from the United States' ongoing unilateral sanctions campaign. But that said, at least 3 other countries, including Somalia, have been allowed to continue to vote without payments for sufficiently demonstrating that they are in fact incapable of said payments. Iran, which continues to funnel cash to multiple terror organizations in the region, as well as to growing nuclear development programs, has not been able to prove as much. Now, speaking of the Trump administration and its effect on the Middle East, whether you agree with the man's decisions or not, one thing is for certain: the narrative and the norms surrounding Israel have changed in the last 4 years, and President Trump has helped to set those changes in motion. With me to discuss is founder and president of the Jerusalem Washington Center, Gideon Israel. Gideon, thanks so much for being with us. Now, what exactly are these changes?
Well, I think there's an overall overarching change, and that's something that I wrote about today. Is that when candidate Trump was speaking in front of the AIPAC conference in 2016, he said that if I'm elected, the days when Israel is treated as a second-class citizen will end on day one, believe me. And I think that was really the outlook with which he took in terms of the relationship with Israel. And therefore all these things which had been going on for decades, for example, the United States not recognizing, the administration not recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, or not moving its embassy to Jerusalem, having your embassy in an ally's capital, or not recognizing the Golan, which is a territory that Israel captured in a defensive war and something that's critical to Israel's security, recognizing Israel's connection to their ancestral homeland, which is Judea and Samaria, and basically saying that that settlements in that area are not illegal; they're actually consistent with international law. So all these things are things that changed under the Trump administration, not even to mention the close cooperation in terms of military and intelligence. Many of the things we don't even know about it. We don't know about the details, but we've heard about what's been happening. But the overarching way that the Trump administration has related to Israel is treating it as a normal, close ally and no longer as a second-class citizen.
Well, so now really comes, I guess, the test of these changes, because has the status quo, have the facts on the ground or the narrative changed to any permanent degree, or do you see the Biden administration, making reversals or rejections of any of these changes that you're talking about?
I think it'll be difficult to make changes in terms of. I don't think the Biden administration will move the embassy back to Tel Aviv. It's also in United States law. One of the major things that will change is that the Palestinians will once again become a major player for the Biden administration in terms of Middle East peace. The Trump administration, in the beginning, they had meetings with Mahmoud Abbas. He was invited to the White House. But once the Trump administration felt that they weren't dealing with someone who was seriously interested in moving towards peace, so the Palestinians kind of became an irrelevant player. And even more than that, the United States moved to remove funding from the Palestinian Authority, to remove funding from UNRWA, which I think John Bolton called a failed mechanism. So all the ways that the Palestinians were receiving the delegation in Washington, the offices of the PLO were closed. So the Palestinians are going to again become a central part in the Biden peace plan. And it's possible that in areas like recognizing the Golan or even recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, maybe the Biden administration will move to implement measures that will maybe gut the policy from meaning. But it's yet to be seen.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. Until then, Gideon Israel, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on, arguably the Trump administration's biggest accomplishment is being tarnished already, and it has nothing to do with the outgoing president. Reports from the United Arab Emirates now revealing that, unfortunately, Israelis are quickly overstaying their welcome. And while you might be tempted to blame a clashing of cultures, I think that we can all agree that the poor behavior being reported is unbecoming of any good first impression. Now, since the signing of the Abraham Peace Accords over the summer, tens of thousands of Israelis have flooded into the Gulf as their new favorite hotspot for international tourism. And while most have left a good impression, there are some who have not, and much to the surprise, actually, of their eager Emirati hosts. Arab media reporting Israelis behaving disrespectfully, i.e. throwing rowdy parties, damaging luxury cars, cooking in hotel rooms in violation of the hotel rules, ripping off the minibar and replacing the liquor bottles with water, and generally acting rude. Travelicious travel company owner Amalia Lazarov, for one, explaining that it's just because you can speak a few words in Arabic does not make the desk clerk your friend, and that while it's great to finally see Israelis welcomed in the Gulf, such behavior will blow up in our faces. Several guides and companies already claiming to be fed up with working with Israelis who've developed a reputation for being difficult and problematic. So, on a personal note, I'd like to say to all of my Israeli friends and family that I know firsthand just how welcoming and generous Israelis can be. So please be mindful to put that same best foot forwards when you're traveling abroad and among new friends. We can be better, and we should demand better of ourselves. And now, on another note, here's an Israeli making a very good impression in the international community. Israeli chef Asaf Granit now accepting his first Michelin star for his Chabot restaurant in Paris. And the Michelin star guide praising Chabot for featuring Granit's creative cuisine and, quote, trademark feature of an unbridled atmosphere with rough and ready decoration. As for Granit, the chef who co-owns a number of international restaurants says that he's overwhelmed by the announcement, adding that for him, the biggest thing here is that 4 Israeli partners from Jerusalem decided to open a restaurant in Paris and did it with their money and their vision. But finally, when asked about the future, Granit explains that there's nothing left to do now but get focused on getting the second star. In other news, a decade of blindness miraculously reversed in Haifa in a first-of-its-kind success story. But don't worry, there will be plenty more on the horizon. When 78-year-old Haifa resident Jamal Fouani lost his sight to edema 10 years ago, he became just one of the 30 million others worldwide who report as legally blind each year. But unlike the millions of others, Jamal is now the first patient on Earth to ever successfully regain his vision with a completely synthetic cornea, courtesy of Israeli company Kornit. Until now, corneal transplants have been rare and risky operations, with an estimated 1 donor cornea available for every 70 people who needed it. That makes for roughly 55% of the world's population that has no accessibility to corneal tissue, as there are too few doctors trained in corneal transplants, which take 2 years just to learn, and also since even if you have a cornea harvested, doctors have just 1 week to implant it. Kornit technology, on the other hand, has a shelf life of up to 2 years. And since getting approval over the summer to begin human trials, Kornit is now officially on its way towards completing a multinational trial and becoming the leading global provider for corneal tissue. As for Jamal, he's just one of 10 people approved for a trial with Kornitz implants at the Rabin Medical Center, with 2 additional sites in Canada planned to open later this month, and 6 other sites at different stages of approval across the US, France, and the Netherlands. The trials are set to include blind patients who are not suitable candidates for or who have failed 1 or more corneal transplantations. All right, now, during several days out of the month of January every year, different sects of Orthodox Christians flock to the Kasar al-Yahud baptismal site for Epiphany celebrations. Charon Regev, who is the director of the Department of World Religions at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is here to share some more insights. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, can you tell us a little bit about Epiphany and what its significance is? What are we celebrating?
This is one of the oldest Christian feasts. It has been celebrated since the end of the 2nd century, even before the establishment of Christmas holiday. Epiphany derives from a Greek word, which means manifestation or showing forth. And basically, this is a very important sacred holiday that commemorates the occasions on which the divinity of Jesus was manifested. According to the Orthodox and Oriental churches, this is the time when John the Baptist, St. John, baptized Jesus in the Jordan River. According to the Catholic Church, this is the visit of the 3 kings of the East, the visit of the 3 Magi.
Wow. All right, so what is the significance of why different sects in Christianity celebrate it on different days, though? Because I've read that January 6th is a big day for the Epiphany, and now, of course, it's January 18th we're talking.
Yes, because different sects use different calendars. As you know, Julius Caesar introduced the Julian calendar, which is still being used by the Orthodox churches. And there's about 13-day gap between the Gregorian calendar, which was introduced by Pope Gregorius during the 16th century. And thus, the Julian calendar celebrates January 6th on January 19th, according to the Gregorian calendar.
So now I understand that this was made special because of the demining or the removal of thousands of landmines from the area, which allowed celebrations like this to kind of take hold for the first time in a long time. But what was it like planning this sort of event during coronavirus and lockdowns?
So obviously, in order to respect all the clergy and attendees of this sacred and very important ceremony, we had to keep everyone safe and healthy, and thus we had to limit the number of worshippers that could attend the ceremonies to a few dozens. Usually these ceremonies attract thousands of pilgrims that come from all over the world to celebrate at Kasar al-Yahud on the Jordan River. This year, it was mainly clergy and very few pilgrims that were able to attend the ceremonies.
I sincerely hope that this stupid pandemic will end soon and more people will be able to come and visit, pilgrims or clergy. Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be cold and rainy with lows around 48 degrees Fahrenheit or 9 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect more heavy storms and showers all day, with the average high dropping to 53 degrees Fahrenheit or 12 degrees Celsius. And now before we go, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. Now, you might be surprised, but these are happy screams. I love these videos. This is a lone soldier from England going back to visit his mom in Manchester. I think it's safe to say she was surprised. That is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.24 shekels to the American dollar and 2.55 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And don't forget, of course, to visit our all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and let us know what you think. Subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.